So we'll talk for a while, and then we'll open it up to questions from the audience. Let me just get started by saying you all have, I think, a total of 28 years in the governor's chair. I want to ask each of you, what's been the biggest change in North Carolina politics since the time that you started?
I bet we'll say the same thing, and that's the polarization of the political parties, not just here in North Carolina, but all across the country. And there are a lot of factors that contribute to that, but I'll save that for another question.
Governor?
I think the most important thing that is happening is the realization that a lot of poor people and African Americans and Hispanics have not been treated fairly, have not been given an opportunity to become all they can and ought to be. And we are now beginning to, I think, realize that. It happened, it was wrong, we ought to change it, and we can in North Carolina, and we should.
Governor McCrory?
I think in the state of North Carolina, the biggest change has probably been the transformation of the urban centers. Raleigh, Durham, Chapel Hill, the Wilmington, Nashville, of course, Charlotte, the Triad, and the tremendous growth of those areas while we've had a decrease in population in the small rural areas. And that's caused a very interesting political divide also. I think since Governor Hunt was in office and I was in office, there's been a flipping of the constituencies' political viewpoints. The rural areas have become more conservative, the urban areas have become more liberal, and that's really changed the political dynamics. And I think one of our great challenges, and it's always had a challenge, urban-rural challenges, is how do we connect the two and let the rural areas enjoy some of the benefits and connectivity with markets in Charlotte, Raleigh, Asheville, Greensboro, Wilmington, and so forth. And that, to me, is a major challenge, which I thought the film did a great job in describing some of those differences. And I saw that as governor coming from, as mayor of Charlotte. That was a big realization for me.
I want to go back to that, but I also want to get to what Governor Martin was mentioning about polarization. Now, you all were in office when Democrats and Republicans worked together in Raleigh for the most part. Kind of. Things have changed. We see that every day.
You could get along. You could get along. You could battle, and then where you had differences, and then there'd be things that you could work on together. And I saw that in Washington, and saw that also when I got back to Raleigh. But now with the so-called social media, people have the ability to get into their own little silo and only look for the news that they want to hear. It doesn't mean it's false. It just means that's where they can hear what they want, and it can drive home their own beliefs. They're very uncomfortable hearing something that disputes. Then we've had gerrymandering, which the three of us and the other former governors got involved in to try to begin to move away and reform that system. It didn't start with Republicans, but Republicans had gerrymandering on steroids because of the high-speed computers that we had. And so we saw a need to deal with that. But that's one of the contributions. And another, some of you won't like me to say this, but those of you good moderates, pragmatists, centrists, pulled out of both parties. And the result of that was it left the two parties further apart. Back in our day, the two parties overlapped. They don't anymore. You just find that either party, you want to mention first, Republicans have their safe districts. They don't have to talk to the Democrats. The Democrats have safe districts. They don't have to work with. They don't have to pay attention.
Governor Hunt,
centrists need to get back in the party of your choice and moderate your party, and that way have some leverage to get people to talk to you.
Governor Hunt, how do you do
That's
it?
a very good point. But a lot of this has been caused by the fact that the special interests, or whatever in their own spectrum, have the money. And they won't give the money unless you'll be an extremist for them. And it works both ways. So we moderates, we're pretty moderate in this crowd right here.
Might not have been in our day.
No, I was all the way through. But, and you were too, by the way. But the point is, we've got to figure out. I'd rather have the whole party putting the money out than just the special interest groups. So we ought to figure out if in North Carolina we can do something about this stuff. It's one thing to comment on it and deplore it and all that, but I want to see if in North Carolina we can find some ways to do things. Historically, we have in a lot of areas, education and so forth. I'd like for us to see if we can find a way to do it. Us three working together, and the two governors who are not here have just recently worked together on some things. Maybe we can do that with regard to some fundamental political things.
Protecting the separation of powers is one of them.
Right.
We each had difficulty.
That's
that
right.
was not Democrats against a Republican governor. It was legislature against the governor of whatever party. We've all had to deal with it.
Speaking of the legislature, here we are in January 2020, a year after the legislature convened last year to start their session. We're about 6 or 7 months past the start of the fiscal year, and North Carolina still doesn't have a budget. What can Governor Cooper and the legislature do to find common ground to come together, or can they?
Well, the current governor is having similar problems that I had. I see it more of a power struggle than an issue struggle. In fact, when I was governor, I had a Republican legislature, and when I came into office, they had been in power for 1 year, and they wanted the power in the legislature. And you're seeing some of the same dynamics occur in Washington, D.C. right now. It's a power struggle between the Senate and House, which is one power struggle, which you don't read about much here, but there's always a power struggle between Senate and Houses in both the federal legislature and the Raleigh's legislature. And then there's the power struggle between the executive branch and the legislature. And a lot of it is about who has the authority. In fact, when I was governor, I sued my own Republican legislature and asked Governor Hunt and Governor Martin and Governor Easley and Governor Perdue to join me in the lawsuit against my own party. And it was about executive power. Thomas Stiff, my chief of staff's in the crowd. He knows it well. I mean, it was a tough battle, but so a lot of this is not just partisanship. It's basically about power and turf. And with power, by the way, comes money. Because if one of those branches get more power, then they have the opportunity to raise more money.
No.
And then when they can raise more money, they get surety of being reelected. And that's one of the big dynamics is power and money. There is a correlation between the two in politics.
So where did Governor Cooper and the legislature find common ground now? I mean, teachers don't have a pay raise. Other things are going unfunded. How would you do it, Governor?
Well, I think the folks out here got to do something about it. Now, the legislature is sitting down there. My daughter's in the legislature. Unfortunately, from my perspective, she's in the minority party. If she were in the majority party, it would change. Maybe. My point simply is this. It won't do for North Carolina have a legislature down there with about $1 billion available that we could put in the schools. We could put it into Medicaid and health care for people. We could put it into doing things about transportation and so forth. The legislature needs to they could come back right now. They ought to come back and enact that budget. Now, the governor and the legislature got to work it out together. We know that. I worked hard with Republicans when I was there. And I had Democrats most of the time, but I had Republicans a good bit of the time. You can work together, and you all should make them work together. But we have got to get this done, and we've got to do something, by the way, about our schools, and we've got to do something about health care, because having so many of these poor people not have health care is wrong.
Let me tell you another thing that I'd recommend for both Washington and for Raleigh, which had an impact on me, and I think it's having a terrible impact on Washington, D.C., is there is a new concept of where we're almost becoming a parliamentary government within our legislature, in both the Democrat and Republican legislators, where you have a Republican caucus and a Democratic caucus, which is a fight enough. That's enough of a fight between the two. But within both the Democratic caucus and the Republican caucus in Raleigh and in D.C., whether it be Nancy Pelosi or Tim Ryan. You have all these other caucuses within that caucus. It's almost like parliamentary caucus. So you have a conservative caucus, you have a freedom caucus, you have a black caucus, you have a women's caucus, you have a Latino caucus. And the more you divide, the more we look like a parliamentary government, and therefore the leaders of the Senate and House in both Raleigh and in Washington, D.C. are beholden to small minorities within their own caucuses to get anything done. And I think one of the first things any strong leader should do, and I say this to my Republicans who decided to join a Freedom Caucus, for example, which stopped some things that I wanted to be done in the last 2 years in Washington, is to say no more, only two caucuses, a Republican caucus and a Democratic caucus, and not all these other caucuses which segregate us very similar to the way the media is segregating us now. You know, we've got the conservative channel, the liberal channel, the old people channel, the young people channel, the black channel, the women's channel. We're segregated much
The McCrory channel.
The what? What'd you say?
The McCrory channel.
Yeah, that's now except for that. That's perfect. By the way, and now that I'm in the media, I'm talking to the same audience, and I'd rather have a much more mixed audience in radio. You know, we have the NPR audience and the WBT audience. We have, we've become more segregated than we were 30 or 40 years ago, and I think that's hurting political dialogue too.
Let me add a word to put in about the subject of the dispute between the governor and the legislature on the budget. And by the way, y'all saw me squirming. It wasn't over what Governor Hunt was saying. Somebody sent a note that my microphone had slid down. It was a wardrobe malfunction. So got that. You know what I'm talking about?
I know.
Well, but there are these
Janet
two
Jackson
major
episode here.
there are these two major issues that have been mentioned: public education and Medicaid. Now, my view is that public education, the public schools, that should be and is the number one priority for responsibility of the state of North Carolina. It's number one. And we don't always treat it as number one. I know you agree with me. And we don't always treat it that way. Even when I was a county commissioner here in Mecklenburg County, our predecessors had put the school budget last. And I learned from that it was not only the right thing to do, but politically smart to say we're going to put the public schools first, and we did. We'd bring them in first, but previously they'd come in last and all the money had been spent, and they'd get a reduction. They wouldn't, and so I made it a point every year to propose an increase in the percentage of the general fund that went to public schools. And lo and behold, the legislature would then see if they could top that, and that was good, because I wished them well, and I didn't have a veto then. I was the last governor to not have the veto. You know, back then they even had the veto in Georgia. I mean, that was my home state, so that's the reason. But even in American Samoa. And I was glad that I could get it through the Senate, and my friend Jim Hunt was able to hold on to that and get it through the House. But I think we need to put the public schools first and solve that dispute. Just lay it on the table. Yeah, we got some money. It's got to be spread over years, but it's going to go to favor public schools in North Carolina.
Governor Hunt, you'd agree with that?
Other things are put off.
Yes, I do agree with that mostly.
Mostly.
No, primarily, I really do. But I want everybody here to think about it. I hope you're aware of it. But if you're not, I want you to become aware of it and get involved with it, hopefully. When I was governor, the state Supreme Court came down with a decision that every child was entitled to a good basic education. I don't remember exactly what the words were, but constitutionally entitled to that, and that they were not getting it. And
in rural counties especially.
That's right, but across a great deal of North Carolina, they weren't getting it. So now we've had people work on this, and we have a really fine report that came out, a very good commission and a good judge, good moderate conservative judge, has ruled that we've got to start providing that good basic education, and that it's got to include good early childhood education. If you don't get a good early childhood education, you won't do well enough in those public schools. That's what gets you an opportunity when you're there that you can use it. So I would hope all of us would think about that. Think about Leandro, think about the recommendations that are now coming forward to assure that children start to school, I like to say, healthy and ready to learn, ready to fly. If we'll do that, folks, then the public schools will have a far better chance of succeeding if we give them enough funds. But you've got to give them a chance. There are too many kids starting to school today who will never get there because they didn't get that good early childhood education.
Governor McCrory?
Well, two other points I want to make that I'm not going to try to top Governor Hunt on education. When he talks about education, you just shut up. But there are two other points. One is we do have to recognize some long-term financial problems in North Carolina and all the other states that we're not talking about. And that is, in North Carolina right now, we have $50 billion of unfunded liabilities for our pension program and for our health care program for state employees, and no one's talking about it. Every politician, Republican and Democrat, puts it off to the side. And by the way, this impacts city and county government too. No one's talking about the unfunded liability of $50 billion, 30 for the medical part and 20 for the pension part. And it's just kind of sitting there on the sideline. The other issue, in addition to education, which we have to confront, and that's the addiction and mental health issue. That was the biggest shock to me because as a mayor, I didn't work in that area. I mainly worked in transportation, public safety, and things of that nature, the hard infrastructure in Charlotte. But healthcare was the biggest challenge as governor because it is a total mess. And there is any politician who says they have the solution for it at the presidential or gubernatorial level, they don't, because it's all these different parties involved that aren't working together. But if you look at the number of beds that are available for mental health care and also for addiction, we can have all the education we want, but if the parents and even some of these children are dealing with the incredible addiction that we have right now, and we don't deal with it directly head on, we're in trouble in this country and in this state. And by the way, this does not discriminate between rural and urban, between black and white, between rich and poor. It hits everybody. And that to me is one of the huge challenges of our country.
I want to unpack.
Jim, we have the money right now in Raleigh to give a big pay raise to teachers who need it. We have the money right now to put serious funds into early childhood, and we have the money now for Medicaid expansion and other things in education. We have it. Let's use it.
Let me ask the Republican governors. We've seen other states, other Republican states, most recently Kansas, which is a pretty red state, adopt Medicaid expansion. What about North Carolina? Is there a case for it in North Carolina that you could make to Republicans?
There's a case for dozens of things, Jim, and I just think we need to take care of our number one responsibility, which is our public schools. I may be in the minority on that, but that's my view, and I don't think we can take the money that a lot of it would be for 1 year. What are you going to do the next year? What will you do when the federal government backs away and says, "Now it's yours"?
Yeah,
I'm reserved.
You go ahead.
well, I met with President Obama on several times, one probably 45-minute meeting to an hour meeting with President Obama, looking at ways we could get waivers to slowly expand Medicaid without breaking the budget. And the dilemma is right now, the original program set up by Lyndon Johnson was to help the elderly, children, and mothers. And we don't have enough money for that right now. I mean, it's underfunded. In fact, when I came in as governor, it was $500 million under budget. I mean, it was in dire situation, meeting the existing needs of the elderly, the poor, and children. And for me to then say I'm going to expand it, I would be impacting the current coverage where we didn't currently have money. And no one was telling me how the feds were going to take 90%, but the other 10% is growing at a rapid rate in Ohio and New York and other states. It's gone up at a much greater increase than anyone anticipated, and it's busting the budget. So this is where everyone knows what needs to be done. It's the strategy to get there and who pays for it. And right now, I'm not sure. I would agree with Jim Martin right now that the federal government says they'll take 90% of it. I don't know what the longevity of that will be, knowing what our federal budget deficit is at this point in time.
$1 trillion.
I think they will continue. All of the Republican states are coming into it. The business people in North Carolina want us to do it. Almost all the major businesses support the expansion of Medicaid in North Carolina. It will be good for our economy, folks, along with education. Governor Martin's exactly right about the fundamental nature of education, public schools. And thank goodness for the work you've done across the areas that these newspapers serve. But health care and education need to go hand in hand. We can do it in North Carolina. We've got the resources right now. We ought to.
I'd like to unpack a couple other issues that were in the video that some of the voters and people in North Carolina talked about. But before that, I wanted to ask Governor.
Good work on that, by the way, wasn't it?
Yeah.
That's good.
Great.
Good. Yeah. By the way, I think I said Medicare and not Medicaid.
Governor McCrory, I just want to ask you a political question real quick. You were just in Washington this week. Monday, you sat in the Senate gallery and watched the impeachment trial. I wanted to ask you, to what extent do you think that'll still be an issue in November of this year in North Carolina, or will it not be?
I think it'll be a 24-hour news cycle the minute it leaves, and we'll move on to other issues. And I hope we do move on to other issues, regardless of where you stand on the issue, because we already know the outcome. But there are issues like addiction, transportation infrastructure. There are issues in education, universities. There are issue of $1 trillion deficit. To me, this is a distraction by both Republicans and Democrats to avoid the tough issues that we must confront for the next generation. And so regardless of how you stand on it, we know the outcome. And I think Congress needs, right now, the thing that I saw, very similar to what's happening in Raleigh right now, in Washington, D.C., everything is paralyzed. It was paralyzed, walking the hallways of the Senate and House. No one was doing anything. And that's not good for our country.
One more thing about that. Will it have any effect on the Senate race in North Carolina, one way or the other, or not? Is it a non-issue in the Senate race?
Between now and November, there's going to be so much change in political dynamics, from international relations to trade to immigration. I think other issues will overtake it.
But yes, that issue of impeachment is going to be with us for a long time, not just for the election, but you notice that it took about 86 years before we had our first impeachment. It's 106 years after that before we had our second. And now in the last 21 years we've had two.
Yeah.
And I would predict to you that the vengeance between the two parties is so intense, there not being a center to corral them, that any president who doesn't have a majority in the House of Representatives is likely to be impeached. Now, President likely to be impeached. I did not say removed from office. We've not had one. President Nixon, on my watch, retired. But you just watch. There is that kind of vengeance, and revenge has its own motives. You heard it here.
My fellow governors here are right about the fact that we have got to work together more, better. We can do it, folks. We're reasonable folks. I know a lot of you out there, they do too. We could sit down and figure it out. Now, I know about those special interest groups, and I know about their money.
Yeah.
But we've got to say, well, wait a minute, hold on. We got to work together. I don't know if I was the first governor that had a party, no, Holshouser, Governor Holshouser, wonderful governor, had a legislature of the other party. But in the latter part of my time as governor, I had a Republican House of Representatives, and the House caucus passed a resolution to forbid the Speaker of the House from meeting with me, the Democratic governor. Well, I knew the Speaker of the House. He raised cattle, beef cattle, and I am a cattle man.
More cattle. Yeah.
And so I went to visit with him on his farm in Randolph County up near Greensboro. And I'd go over to his apartment about midnight in Raleigh. You find ways to work together, and they ought to be doing it now. These governors are right.
One theme we heard in the documentary loud and clear was about the urban-rural divide and how people in rural areas feel left out and behind. What can we do about that?
Well, certainly keep growing these wonderful urban areas. I was governor, and I was there when we cut the ribbon on the University of North Carolina at Charlotte University Research Park. I was helping there. Maybe some people here were there when we did that. We've got to keep these urban places with the light rail that you led and the great work that Jim Martin did and his highway named out here for him.
It's named after my grandson.
That's good work. So we've got to have, I am thrilled to see what's happening in the urban centers. It's happening in Raleigh too, as well as Charlotte. But we've got to do all we can to help rural North Carolina be a good place to live and for children to grow up. And Governor Martin's right. Public education is the key to that. And we've got to be very careful that we don't do things that hurt the public schools. And I hope all of you will believe that and work hard on that. But we've also, and good public schools. And by the way, if you want to talk about something that would help the rural areas, let's have good child care. Let's have Smart Start and pre-K available to every child that needs it. That's one of the very best things we can do. Then good schools, well-financed, and of course those fine community colleges we have out there. You got to put the roads out, all of these things. But North Carolina's a state that can do it. We've had that vision. We've worked together. We've got our partisan problems now, but we can work them through. So let's do it.
I have one observation as a small town guy mainly, but the thing about the rural economic development is, first of all, be real careful that you're not turning over all your farmland into industrial property. Set aside an area in each county as has been done. But then I think it's important to reinvigorate our State Department of Commerce to be able to call the shots rather than have these independent regional economic development groups taking the lead, because they're fighting each other. And that makes it difficult for the governor and the legislature to take sides when it's your people that are fighting each other. And then what you do is you try to get it to the modest-sized cities that are scattered across the rural areas in both the eastern coastal plains, sandhills, and in the mountain areas, because those areas already have the strength of a workforce that's already aggregated there, and it'll help to build up those wages, which is we saw happen for a period during my term. Getting more jobs available, good paying jobs, is the best social program you can have, because it helps to bid up the wages rather than legislate them.
So real quick, infrastructure is, I think, the main way we're going to help the smaller towns and the rural areas and connect that infrastructure with the big metro areas. So there's a chance for a town 60, 70, 80, 100 miles from here to connect to Charlotte and Charlotte's airport, and they could have industry and talent live there instead of just picking the urban centers. You know, connect better Roxborough with Durham, connect better Wadesboro, which is almost like an eastern North Carolina town. Wadesboro, you drive through Wadesboro on 74, but you never stop there. Wadesboro is a very, very poor town with no industry whatsoever. And we need to do a better job of helping the Wadesboros and there are Wadesboros outside of Raleigh, outside of Wilmington, outside of Greenville, outside of Asheville. And I think connect them through transportation, just like we connected the south side of Charlotte down South Boulevard with light rail. You know, South Boulevard was a dead area of this city. No one moved on South Boulevard 20 years ago, and because we put infrastructure of light rail in, all of a sudden now we've got $8 to $10 billion of new investment in the south end. And as governor, I was attempting to take that concept of connecting small towns through infrastructure, water and sewer, roads, and also rail. And sooner or later, we all three agree on this, we got to connect Charlotte and Raleigh with better rail, and in between have some of the small town rural areas benefit from that, and connect with Atlanta and Richmond and other areas.
Jim, I was in Pittsburgh a few years ago talking to a person in one of the biggest banks there now here. And they told me about the bank buying a smaller bank a good ways out of Pittsburgh. And those people were going to all possibly lose their jobs. But they said, if you don't, we are guaranteed you're going to keep a job because we'll run buses out 70, 80 miles to bring you in so that you keep your job.
That's right.
Now, that might work in some areas in North Carolina.
North Wilkesboro and Lowe's did that.
And so, yes, we'd like to have light rail. And that's a great thing. I commend you all here in Charlotte putting it in place. It needs to happen in the Research Triangle of North Carolina. But we might have to think about some of these other things that could really get out into some of these rural areas that are not going to have light rail.
Let me move on to something, to follow up on something Governor Martin said about gerrymandering. You all know that this is a huge year to elect members of the General Assembly, because the General Assembly that's elected this year will draw new districts for Congress and for the legislature for the next 10 years at least, and maybe more. Is it time for an independent redistricting commission?
Absolutely. Absolutely. But we ought to be proud of what we've already done in North Carolina. Listen, I've seen this stuff work both ways. It ought to be done in a fair way. We're going to continue to have a two-party state. That's the way we are in North Carolina now. And they can work together. But when they get to Raleigh, they've got to work together and not go home without a budget and talk about we're going to go 2 years without a budget. That's ridiculous, and it's wrong.
So we have one vote for an independent redistricting commission. What about you guys?
I think we all agree with an independent commission, but the point is who appoints them? I mean, everyone says, I'm for an independent as long as we get to appoint the independent. So, you know, and the people who appoint the independent will be the politicians. They know exactly who they appoint. They'll know who the Republicans and Democrats are, and whoever controls the legislature or the governor's office will go, well, I'm going to appoint my people on that. So it sounds good in theory, but I do think there's a way, and the governors, and we all kind of work on this concept of how we can do more fair types of gerrymandering. By the way, it's not just a state issue. Charlotte and Mecklenburg County also have gerrymandered districts. With all due respect, right now the Democrats are in charge of that. The school board districts, the county and the city is extremely gerrymandered. Just like the state Republican legislature has gerrymandered the state. So both parties are very guilty of this not wanting competition. And I think competition's good. I like competition.
Governor Martin?
Well, yes, the issue is how do you define an independent commission?
Yeah.
The Sanford Institute at Duke University has been doing some great work in exploring what other states are doing, what they're talking about, what sort of objective criteria you should have, such as minimizing the number of counties that are divided. So you have a maximum number of whole counties, such as having, this is going to sound like a nerd here, but so that the perimeter, the ratio of the perimeter to the volume is limited, to keep it so that it would be more compact and less snaking out across the district like Mel Watt's old district did. And those kind of things need to be a part of it too. But most important, I think, is we need to have it so that it can go into the Constitution, and maybe both parties need to be threatened that the other one would win in order to get together to do this.
Agree.
But that's going to be difficult because under the Constitution now, the General Assembly can only make that call. They get to approve the districting, and they have to give up some power or have it in a way that they either vote up or down. And so there are a lot of factors that need to go into that, not just the nature of the commission.
But we've just made a big step toward it.
And we were involved in it.
So we can do it, folks. But we ought to follow up now. And
But we had to
put it in
rely on the
place.
Supreme Court
That's right.
to help
Right.
us.
Yeah.
Right.
Governor, your daughter is one of the people here who has a tough race this year for the legislature, for the North Carolina House. Let me ask you all, do you think Republicans are going to keep control of both chambers this year?
No. Hey, it's going to be close. It's going to be close in both chambers. North Carolina's going to be close. You know, that's all right. Listen, I remember the days when the Democrats had everything. And some of those Democrats in the legislature wanted to run over me
That's right.
as a Democratic governor, especially when I was so young.
Well, I thought you'd talk about it later because I was for you then. You know, I was.
In any event, I think it's going to be tight as a tick. The election, I couldn't tell you how it's going to come this year. I think Governor Cooper is going to be a strong candidate, but that's going to be close. And the legislature is going to be close. And the Supreme Court is going to be close. It's going to all be close. All the more reason to get out there and work hard. Let's register everybody. Let's get them to the polls, whoever they are, and let them decide how to vote.
You know, we have at least one candidate in the audience and maybe more.
More.
What would you suggest to down ballot candidates who aren't running for president, who aren't running for the U.S. Senate? How are they going to get their message out, and how are they going to get the attention of the voters and the media?
Door to door. I just talked to my daughter Rachel coming in tonight, Rachel Hunt, who's in a 50-50 district. She's going door to door. She's been to people this week that have never seen anybody running for the legislature. And that's hard work, but it is hard work. This stuff is hard. And so I would suggest that candidates get out there and work hard, use your mailers, you can do that, talk about what you believe in, invite people to get back to you. But I think that television is going to be so expensive this year, you can't buy it. And you got to figure out, I don't know how to use all the new technology to reach people, but figure that out. And then every one of you get out there and work in these campaigns. Don't leave it up to somebody else and these poor candidates. They're working themselves to death. I got to share one little thing. I helped Rachel at the polling place last year.
I saw you there.
That's right. Well, this one fella came up, and I saw him when he got out of the car, and he looked like somebody I might be successful with. So I rushed out there, and I said, "I'm former Governor Jim Hunt." He looked at me, he said, "You are governor, aren't you?" Governor Hunt. And I said, "Yes." I said, "My daughter Rachel's running for the legislature." He said, "Yeah, I know, she came to my house twice." That's the way to do it this year.
I don't disagree with the grassroots. Also, you need to get as much free publicity as possible. But you got to be able to raise money, and money is just obscene. The race that you're talking about, the Brawley Hunt race with your daughter, Bill Brawley, who's a good friend of mine and helped me a lot in transportation, that's $1 million race for a state house seat. Over $1 million for a state house seat.
Probably 2 million.
Huh? 2 million.
Probably be 2 million.
Combined.
I mean, that's just unheard of,
I mean,
is the amount of money that's being taken to get a grassroots campaign going. And I don't know where the controls are. I mean, in my governor's race, I raised $25 million, and I broke all records, but my opponent, I think, had $50 million or $35 to $40 million. And it's a 10,000 vote difference out of 4.6 million people. 10,000 vote difference out of 4.6 million. And if you don't think $10 to $15 million makes a difference in 10,000 votes, it does. And your Rachel and Bill Brawley was 60 to 80 votes different, I believe. and over $1 million spent on that campaign. So this time consuming. In fact, in Washington, when I was there, there are people that the legislators, both Republican and Democrat, have to go to a separate building and dial for dollars. One of the mistakes I made as governor, by the way, I should have started dialing for dollars my first 2 years, but I thought you had to work.
But remember this, it's got to where it takes a lot of money just to get beat with, okay?
Yeah, that's
And
true.
so that means don't give up if the other can raise more.
That's right.
Get out there, get your neighbors working, get them to tell their neighbors their.
Grassroots can still win it.
You can do it. Yeah,
Let's,
I had to do it.
let's go to the audience for questions. I think
Okay.
there's some microphones being passed around.
Maybe we see the people.
Nice crowd.
Hand
Yeah,
here.
Wow.
Why don't you raise the lights up, folks? We'd like to see you.
There's supposed to be a microphone right here in the front.
Thank you.
You want to introduce yourself and
I'm Lloyd Scher, former commissioner. And governors, I have a two-part question. I served on the Chamber of Commerce at Hyde County. Our big issue was the lack of gas and internet service for the school in the area in Columbus, North Carolina, and Hyde County. The second question is, you each were dealt with term limits. Is it time to talk about term limits for the House and Senate members?
Well, I'll take the communication issue, and that's something in the urban areas we take for granted, but we have rural schools that still don't have the internet. And those that have the internet, half the school might reach it and the other half doesn't. So one of my I went and talked to the FCC, I probably had 4 or 5 visits to DC trying to do experimental implementation of getting internet to our poor rural schools, because right now if the kids don't have access to the internet, especially in their school, much less their houses in these rural areas, they are going to have a very difficult chance to get a good education. So I think one of the big challenges for future governors and legislatures is to continue to implement the technology that myself and my predecessors, both Republican and Democrat, did, because that's why I'm talking about infrastructure. If they don't have the roads and the water and sewer and technology, they are going to continue to lose population. And we're going to suffer from it.
We absolutely should do it. We've made some progress. The companies are doing a lot, by the way, on their own.
Yeah.
But we should put some public resources into it. Remember I said the legislature's down there with $1 billion? They haven't put into that budget yet?
It's outrageous.
Put some of it into this. Now put more of it into education and early childhood education. But we could do some of this.
let's try to get a one-word answer, yes or no, about the term limits for legislators.
Not going to happen.
It's a waste of time discussing.
I don't think it's a good idea. Generally, it's not the most important thing to do. But I'm a little bit open to that. My George, especially
I'm open
Washington,
to it. I
D.C.
supported it, but got nowhere.
You did?
Yeah, sure.
I like the idea.
You can come back in after you lay off of it.
I like the ideas of seniority in legislators. The main reason people stick around is so they become chairman of a committee, and then once you become chairman, you never want to leave. And Washington's had some, I think, some smart moves. It's probably hurt the Republicans, but in the long run, I think it will help that just because you stick around long enough, you get to be chairman. And now, at least in the Republican caucus in Washington, D.C., you can only stay as a chairman for a certain amount of time, which requires rotation. And usually when the chairman loses the gavel, they retire. And I think that's good.
Is there another question from anybody? A lot of questions.
There's one up here.
Microphones? Should get somebody elsewhere in the audience too.
Thank you. Bolin McClung from Pineville. So I'm on the Planning Commission here in Charlotte, and Governor Martin, affordable housing. There doesn't appear to be a state program for affordable housing. It actually appears to work against Charlotte every time Charlotte wants to enact some sort of affordable housing policy. Somebody speaks up immediately. It's not allowed by the general statutes. What can be done about that?
We got to have more affordable housing. The state did some work on it way back when I was first governor, but we haven't done enough. And I want to tell you, especially as some of these cities are going in and taking the places where these poor people have lived, what are they going to do? And by the way, we need to have affordable housing so teachers can live where their schools are. That's a problem across America. So yes, that's something that we really ought to be focusing on across North Carolina.
Let me just say something about Pineville, a city I love, and I worked with many of your mayors in the past, but I begged the town of Pineville to change their zoning laws to require more density so I could put light rail across 485, and at the time, the light rail line there at 485 and not go across the bridge. Now, to be truthful, I was out of money anyway. So had I had to put the bridge in, I'm not sure we would have got the south line done or the line to UNCC because that bridge was very expensive. But Pineville, for example, has a great chance to become a village with high density and more affordable housing. And hopefully the long-term plan is to finally build that bridge and get the light rail extended into downtown Pineville.
But you got the toll lanes
Got a
up
great
to
old
my
mall.
house.
Huh?
You got the toll lanes up to my house, and I'll thank you.
Yeah.
We drove in on them tonight.
You just have to remind me of that at every second.
I'm for you,
was
son.
that was my 9,000 votes right there, big guy. But I'm telling you right now, in transportation infrastructure, we got to find a way to pay for it. I mean, the mayors at the time, Republican and Democrat in North Mecklenburg, they all voted for that toll lane, and I went along with their vote because they agreed along with their city council. And my predecessor, Beverly Perdue, agreed to it, and I implemented that, and then it became a political...
It's going to be a testimony to courage. Thank you.
John,
It's great being a former governor as a result, I guess.
Not bad to have that testimony.
But we better... Governor Hunt and Governor Martin and I all agree, if we don't find out how we're going to pay for future infrastructure, you're not going to have it.
let's go to a question from John.
Let me jump in on that one. We've got a great example across the state line in York County that has a program called Pennies for Progress that helps pay for infrastructure. And we're stopped from doing that on the North Carolina side of the line because our state legislature has something called the Dillon Rule. Is there any way we can change that that rule so that counties can take more control of their future?
What is the Dillon Rule?
The Dillon Rule says that the state has to approve any kind of revenue increases that take place within the counties.
Yeah, that's where...
And until they're passed by the state legislature, the county can't go
I
ahead.
didn't know that.
Yeah, what the Dillon Rule, and as mayor, what I did because of the Dillon Rule, we went and lobbied hard. And by the way, I sought Governor Hunt's help. I think you were just changing office, and then Governor Easley, where we put a half-cent sales tax referendum. But I had to go to the legislature to get that approval, to give us permission to have the half-cent sales tax. And the voters of Mecklenburg County gave that to us to implement the light rail system. By the way, people may forget, but a year later, there was an attempt to overturn that in Charlotte-Mecklenburg. And so we had to have another election on that, which would have bankrupted the light rail system. But fortunately, that failed.
You're right. We ought to do it.
I think we have a question up here.
Hi, my name is Denise. I'm just an ordinary citizen.
So are we now, Denise. No
Oh,
problem.
you don't seem too ordinary to me.
That's a nice comment.
Okay, a lot of people
Where is she?
don't realize this by accident and in some ways intentionally. There are 5 legitimate parties in North Carolina, not 2. My question is, what can be done to ensure fairness and openness to everyone in the state's electoral process? And I include the gentleman from the Observer in my question.
You want to take that
Well,
first, Jim?
Thanks, Governor. I think you're talking about the Constitution and the Green and the Libertarians in addition to the other parties. And, at the Observer, we write about them too. We don't necessarily write a lot about everybody, but we will certainly try to say who the candidates are and what they stand for.
There,
The parties,
That's a good question.
the smaller parties unfortunately make most of their effort at a relatively few issues in one category. I know they have thinking about a lot of other things and all the budgetary matters, but they tend to be aligned with just a few things. I personally would think that someday, because of the polarization of parties, we're going to have to look for the creation of a central party. We never tried that. We've tried parties on the outer edges, but not a center party. If you moderates don't get back in the party of your choice, that may be the only way to get to where the two major parties have to deal with the center. When they can't quite get a majority, then they'd have to deal with the center. Now, that's the European parliamentary system. Some places it gets out of hand, and it could get out of hand here. But I think you have to have a broader range for those parties to get more attention.
But folks, support your local newspaper. We've got the same problem down in Raleigh, in the eastern part of the state. It's a real shame.
Why didn't I think
How many of you in this audience subscribe to the Charlotte Observer?
Whoa.
Well, it isn't everybody,
Well,
but
that's how they knew to be here. I don't know. I don't know.
by the way, wait a minute, Governor, I got to say one thing. Support your local radio station. But I do want to say something real
You
quick
don't have
about
to
the parties. There are political games played with the parties, too. I just want to let you know this, and you've seen it at the national level. Al Gore had some opinions about the Green Party maybe costing him the election. You had the Ross Perot situation. In North Carolina, we had a Libertarian candidate run when I did and got 150,000 votes, an election that was decided by 10,000 votes, and I didn't like that. So guess what the Republicans are doing this election? They're making sure a Green Party can get on to take away votes possibly from the Democratic Party. So you've just got to know the political science aspects of the more choices you have, it also divides, and then the major parties will determine, it hurt me to have a Libertarian candidate on the ballot. That and the tolling. But the Green Party now being put on the ballot in this upcoming race will probably have a negative impact on the Democrats. And if it's as Jim says, Governor Hunt says, if it's going to be that tight, those can have a major impact on who wins the majority in both the executive branch and the legislative branches. So I just want to let you know the politics of choice has a broad ramifications from a political science standpoint.
I think we have a question right there.
Let me, and just say, I have subscribed to the Observer for many years, over 40 years, and it has changed so much and become so partisan that it's hard now to even take it and read it, but that's my opinion. My question, my question is this: we left the homeless issue too fast. The gentleman made the comment, and we just almost skated over. But that is a big thing that's necessary for our city of Charlotte, because there are so many people being displaced from homes that they were able to afford, and people are coming in, buying up the property and putting up buildings and homes that they cannot afford. What are we going to do? What do you think we should do? I don't know if you have the answer to that, but what can we do to help the homeless find a place to live so that they too can have a good life? And you know, it's mostly the people of color who are out there that are homeless. There are some whites as well, but they're mostly people of color. And we can't just keep continuing to skip over this issue and not address it.
We, the people, ought to put some of our resources into it, some of our public resources. We provide that money.
We do.
Now, most of us go to a church or a place of worship on Sunday. We talk about what God wants us to do. I heard a sermon recently when the preacher talked mainly about evil. When he got through, I said, listen, we got to be opposed to evil. We got to talk about doing good. We can do that, folks. These people, especially, they're older. Many of them may be minorities who have been discriminated against by our society. I grew up in the segregated South. I didn't realize what it was, how bad it was, how it affected people. That's one of the reasons I'm so strong for public schools, as we all are here. That's one of the reasons I push Smart Start and early childhood education for every child. These are moral issues. I think God wants us to get involved. I really believe that. If you believe it, let's get involved and let's help on this housing issue too.
I agree with you 100%, but first thing, we have to define affordable housing. And I don't think we're doing it at the national, state, or federal level, because housing needs to be broke up into workforce housing, housing for those living on the streets right now, which, by the way, I'd say about 80% of the people sleeping on the streets right outside here, a lot of them have addiction and mental health issues. A lot of them were letting sleep here, which is a mistake because we're not helping them. When I was mayor, we would not let people sleep on the benches. We said, we took them to the homeless shelters. Now we need to build more homeless shelters. We've got to build the shelters and help several around here with basic care, but we can't just put them in a shelter. We've got to put them through addiction issues and give them mental health issue. And this is where I get back to what I talked at the beginning. The mental health and addiction issue is one of the primary reasons for homelessness. Now, for workforce housing, which is a whole different level of housing, that's both rental and for purchase, you're dealing with how is the waitress at the Waffle House going to afford housing? How is the person working at the hotel going to afford housing without living so far away and then paying high gas prices to get here? That's another level of affordable housing. So in the referendums or bonds that we pass, we've got to make sure we clearly understand what type of housing we're talking about it and have a strategy for the 2 or 3 or even 4 different segments of what we call affordable housing. By the way, politically, you talk to I see some city council members and county commissioners here, everyone's for affordable housing until it's in their backyard or in their neighborhood.
Good point.
And so we're all rather hypocrites on that issue too, because you put affordable housing next to your house, people go, wait a minute, you're impacting the value of my house. So we're all extremely liberal for affordable housing until it's in our neighborhood. And that's an issue. The NIMBY issue is an issue that every city council member and county commissioner and state representative is going to have to figure out.
Governor?
I was going to solve this for you, but we just ran out of time.
We are out of time, and I just want to say it's been an honor to have all 3 of you here tonight. I have one final question.
You've
real
covered each
quickly.
one of us, haven't you?
Oh, yeah.
You've covered each one.
Yeah, I have, actually. And does Donald Trump carry North Carolina this year?
What's the question?
Does President Trump carry North
Does he?
Carolina?
Remains to be seen. I don't know. I mean, I really don't know. He was not on my first 16 candidates in the primary. So I'm not a never Trumper. I'm a not yet.
Yeah.
I think no, but
You hope?
if we were voting today, he'd carry it. The Democrats have got to get out there and work their heads off if he's not going to carry it. They've got all kinds of we've got all kinds of problems in getting a candidate we can get behind. But that's our job. It's going to be tight as a tick, as we sometimes say.
Yeah.
But let's all get involved and do what's right for America.
But there are a
We can
lot of
do it.
people that like a lot of the things that he's done and who get very bitter about the 3 years of espionage that's been going on. So it remains to be seen.
Do you want to say anything?
I'm bad at predicting elections. I'm not going to start now, but
You want to talk about 2016?
But I'll tell you what we ought to do, and this is something the 3 of us, we are friends, and we're also, I want to include Governor Easley and Governor Perdue. We are friends, and we believe in dialogue, and we got to quit this stuff where if we disagree with, I've been attacked here in Charlotte since I've come home. My car has been attacked. I've been assaulted in restaurants because people disagree with me. We cannot, I'm not talking about me, I can take it. My family doesn't like it. But we've got to be role models in North Carolina, in this community, like Jim Hunt and I don't agree on a lot of things, but I love Jim Hunt. And I respect him, and I love Jim Martin, and I know he cares for this state and this nation. And we may disagree, but we're going to gracefully disagree. And we've got to learn to do it here, too.
You've seen this on the television news, especially the chant, "What do we want?" You know, whatever it is. When do we want it? Now. I'd say, what do we want? How about a little civil discourse?
Yeah.
Okay. When do we want it? Well, now would be good, but I'd be interested in what you think.
Well, governors, I think my colleague Taylor Batten is going to come out and say a few words, but it's really been an honor to have you guys here, and really appreciate it.
Thank you for coming.
What a great way to kick off this incredibly important election year. Thank you, governors, for being here and for sharing your insights into North Carolina and the issues we face in the 2020 election. We even got the bonus of a wardrobe malfunction. I bet you all weren't counting on that when you came here tonight. I'm Taylor Batten. I'm the managing editor of the Charlotte Observer, and I also want to thank all of you for... Thank you.
There you go. All right.
I want to thank all of you for being here tonight as well. You know, a healthy democracy hinges on having an informed and engaged electorate. That also happens to be what newspapers hinge on. And newspapers and democracy, I believe, thrive together or die together. And so it always does my heart good to see a group like this who cares so deeply about this community and this state, and you all come out on a Wednesday night to make sure you're informed about the issues and contribute to public dialogue. So thank you for doing that. I hope that you will stay informed in the coming weeks and months by reading the Charlotte Observer in print or online. I can promise you that we will have the most sophisticated and comprehensive coverage of the race and of the issues. We are partnering with Elon University to poll voters and talk with them in depth about the issues that matter most to them, whether it's immigration, health care, education, all the other issues we talked about tonight and others. So we're going to be writing about those, and if you all have issues or other stories that you want us to write about, we want to hear from you. So get in touch with me or Jim Morrill or anyone else at the Observer, and we want to hear the story ideas that you have. So again, thank you all for being here. Thank you, governors, for joining us. Thank you to the Knight Foundation for making this evening possible. And thank you all for caring about this election. I will just say, vote, read the Observer, and drive home safely. Good night.
Well said.